Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily News for Monday, February 14th. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is making history. He's invoking the Emergencies Act to deal with trucker blockades in Ottawa and at major border crossings. Mr. Trudeau consulted with the premiers by phone today after holding an urgent meeting with his cabinet last night. He also briefed his caucus early this morning. This comes as anti-government protests have shuttered multiple border crossings and have paralyzed downtown Ottawa for more than 2 weeks. In one of the strongest signs yet of an imminent Russian attack on Ukraine, Canadian Armed Forces troops are being moved out of the country and temporarily relocated elsewhere in Europe. The Defense Department isn't saying how many soldiers have been moved or where they are now being stationed. However, the department says the move does not mean the training mission meant to bolster Ukraine's security forces is over. Alberta RCMP have arrested 11 people after searching 3 trailers and finding weapons. This after a protest against pandemic restrictions near the main U.S. border crossing in southern Alberta. Mounties say they became aware of a small organized group within the larger protest at Coots. Officers seized long guns, handguns, multiple sets of body armor, a machete, a large quantity of ammunition, and high-capacity firearm magazines. Turning to another anti-COVID restriction blockade at the Emerson border crossing in southern Manitoba, which has grown. RCMP say about 75 vehicles have been blocking access to the border. This is up from approximately 50 that were there last week, although the number fluctuates. The Canadian Border Services Agency website says commercial traffic lanes at Emerson are temporarily closed. Meanwhile, some COVID-19 restrictions are being lifted at several provinces today. Saskatchewan's vaccine passport program is no longer in effect. Alberta's mandatory mask requirement for children under 12 in all settings and for all students in schools is over. Gyms and spas reopened at half capacity across Quebec this morning, and indoor sports and recreation activities are resuming, including extracurricular activities at colleges and universities. Well, this comes as Ontario Premier Doug Ford plans to fast-track the province's COVID-19 reopening plan. As of this Thursday, social gathering limits will increase to 50 people indoors and 100 people outdoors, while capacity limits will be removed in restaurants, bars, gyms, and movie theaters. The COVID-19 vaccine certificate system will end on March 1st, but Mr. Ford says masking requirements will stay in place for now. Well, on the East Coast, Fredericton police are monitoring an anti-vaccine mandate protest that started over the weekend near the New Brunswick legislature. Only a small number of people remained as of this morning. Police issued 1 ticket yesterday under the province's Emergency Measures Act and say that they will continue to monitor large vehicle traffic to minimize disruptions downtown. Some concerning news in Ontario as law enforcement agencies across Canada are on the lookout. This comes after police in Peterborough reported the theft of thousands of weapons. Police say a truck carrying about 2,000 firearms was stolen around 3:30 a.m. Sunday. It's not believed there was any ammunition on the truck, and officers say the robbery appears to be an isolated incident. Uber Technologies is launching 3 new services for restaurants offering commissions. A new low 2.9% commission is for restaurants accepting orders directly from their own websites or social media accounts that are fulfilled with Uber Eats delivery people. Another new service with a 3% commission lets diners order and pay on Uber Eats for dine-in restaurant meals. A new 2-tier pricing structure for orders through Uber, which carry commissions starting at 20%, charges delivery fees on the lower tier, but slashes the costs to customers on higher levels. The sister of a woman who disappeared in Saskatoon nearly a year and a half ago is beginning a walk across Canada to raise awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Lindsay Bishop's 10-month walk will begin in Victoria, BC on Friday and conclude in St. John's, Newfoundland. Her 30-year-old sister, Megan Gallagher, was last seen on September 20th in Saskatoon, and 4 months later, police said the case had become a homicide investigation. The walk will be documented on social media channels. An Olympic first for Canada. Christine de Bruin was third in the Olympic debut of monobob. It was also Canada's first sliding medal of the Beijing Olympics. Team Canada is also assured of a women's hockey medal. Canada punched its ticket to the gold medal final for the 7th straight time with a 10-3 semifinal win over Switzerland. The U.S. and Finland are playing in the other semifinal. We'll be back after the break with a look at developments in Ottawa. Stay tuned. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he has invoked the Emergencies Act. This to bring to an end anti-government blockades that he says are illegal and not about peaceful protest. Mr. Trudeau says the act will be used to protect critical infrastructure, such as borders and airports, from the blockades, and is creating time-limited powers that do not already exist. Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair says the government is ready to do what is required to uphold the rule of law, to restore order in communities, and to protect critical infrastructure, especially at the border. This is the first time the Emergencies Act has been invoked since it came into force in 1988. With us to unpack the situation is Mr. Elliott Hughes, Senior Advisor at Summa Strategies. Mr. Hughes, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much for having me.
So this is a very big move, Mr. Hughes. Tell us a little bit more about the Emergencies Act and what temporary powers are currently allowed under it.
It is a very big move. As you mentioned, it's never been invoked before. Essentially, it's using invoking provisions to deal with public order emergencies, something that you're seeing in Ottawa. I, in fact, work just right next to Parliament Hill, and it is a wild scene down there. And then obviously what we saw at the border as well. And the government can invoke on a time-limited basis, I think the Prime Minister stressed that, checked by Parliament, an ability to move in and to be a bit more forceful, so to speak, on some of these areas that they see developing today.
And what kind of reasons has the government given to enact the Emergencies Act?
Well, I think they feel as though they're at a little bit of a wit's end in terms of dealing with it through the police. The situation in Ottawa is, I would say, close to out of control, downtown core anyways. There is very little oversight by the police. The occupiers seem to be able to move around and do what they please, setting up hot tubs and really making a mockery of our key institutions in our democracy. And the government felt as though it was time to put that to an end and to step in. Because the Ottawa Public or the Ottawa Police Services hasn't been able to keep control of the situation to date.
And what do we know so far about the responses from individual provinces regarding this?
Well, Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, seems to be on board with the invoking of the Emergencies Act. But there seems to be a little bit of a colder reception from Premiers Kenney and Moe from out west. I believe they are asking for those provinces to be excluded. We'll see how that plays out over the coming days. Obviously, we know of the situation taking place in Coutts, Alberta. I believe the Prime Minister will want to deal with that situation. But at least for him, dealing with Ottawa, I would say the sort of central point of all this after the Ambassador Bridge has been cleared, he's got Doug Ford on his side.
We'll definitely have to keep an eye on this developing situation. Tell us a little bit more about these blockades themselves. How many blockades are we looking at right now?
Well, they're spread out across the country. They seem to pop up overnight in some cases. The one in Ottawa is perhaps the one that's getting the most international attention and probably the most national attention. And again, as I said, it is quite something. I don't know if your viewers have been to Ottawa, but essentially it means the central city is sort of at a standstill. And you've got trucks piled up on top of one another or sort of end to end along major arteries in the downtown core. Businesses are closed. It's a very difficult situation, I would say, for individuals who live there, for people who work there, and the businesses that operate there. And it's been like this for 3 weeks, and it's gotten to the point where that's a very big problem. You've got other situations. We saw the Ambassador Bridge getting dealt with in a swift fashion this weekend, and then you've also seen the situation at the Coutts border as well. So these are popping up, and it's something that I'm sure the Prime Minister and his team want to make sure don't continue in the days and weeks that follow.
And how do you think this Emergencies Act is likely to impact this Ottawa protest in particular?
Well, I think it gives them the tools that they need to essentially designate that area as an emergency area. You can begin then setting up, I would say, probably a perimeter fence of some sort you can start to activate the RCMP in a more forceful way, where you begin really going block by block to dismantle this thing. It's going to take a long time, in my estimation, to get through everything. You've got these massive trucks there that, as I said, are set up sort of end to end, probably close to a couple hundred of them. And that's going to take a long time. But I would say this now allows the government to be able to go in there and begin dismantling the occupation.
We'll definitely have to keep an eye on this developing story. Mr. Hughes, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you.
All right, stay with us. After the break, we'll be speaking to a young host, the host of The Wyatt Sharp Show. He's a journalist who has spoken to multiple party leaders in Canada. He has an unwavering passion for politics and talent for being in front of the camera. But most impressive of all is the fact that he's only 13 years old. We'll be speaking to him when we return, followed by more news from around the world. So stay with us. We'll be right back on Forum Daily News. A 13-year-old journalist is catching attention for his passion for politics and all things related to news. Wyatt Sharp had already interviewed top politicians such as Doug Ford, Jagmeet Singh, several provincial ministers, and many members of parliament by just the age of 12. The young man has also been interviewed himself by top news outlets because of his love for politics and his talent in front of the camera. Wyatt is the host of The Wyatt Sharp Show. And joining us now to tell us more about the show and his passion for journalism and politics is young Mr. Wyatt Sharp himself. Wyatt, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Now, usually when I talk to 13-year-olds, Wyatt, it's not about journalism and politics. So what got you into this at such a young age?
It was, I think, kind of the awareness and seeing how, various things that, were happening around me were, actually having an impact, not just on me, but also on my peers and my family members. And I guess one example of that would be about a week before the coronavirus lockdowns kind of started happening. We were in Florida. And we were getting notifications that, things like schools would be canceled for the duration of about 2 weeks. Non-essential businesses, rather, would also be closed. And then I was kind of starting to realize how it was having an impact on me. And then, when I got home, I decided to, research a little bit more about it because obviously I had quite a bit of time on my hands. And so I decided to do some more research about it and then kind of thought it would be something I would be interested in. And then what I did was I messaged my local member of parliament and I asked a little bit about kind of just what he was doing and what his role was, because at the time I really didn't quite know. And so he explained it to me. And then he messaged our local newspaper. I live in a fairly small community, and got me a column. And then in January of last year, so 2021, I started my show. And since then, I've been able to interview many great people, including Prime Minister Trudeau, Premiers Ford, Kenney, and many more.
And you're doing a great job, Wyatt. I saw your show. Tell us a little bit more about your experience so far in the world of journalism and politics.
Well, I mean, one thing that's been interesting is getting involved in such an unprecedented time, getting involved, during COVID, because, politics isn't always about, what it's been about these last 2 years. These last 2 years, a lot of the news has been centered around COVID. Basically any press conference or media availability that is held, COVID is mentioned at least once or twice, sometimes even more in that media availability. So it's changed the way I've done a lot of things. When I first started, I had to, do my interviews virtually just because of the times we were in. As of recently, now that people are, getting vaccinated and such, I've been, able to have a couple more interviews in person, which has definitely been a lot better because you're able to kind of connect with the person directly in person as opposed to doing it through a computer screen. But it's definitely been, an unprecedented time to, be involved in politics. But it's been very interesting, and just again seeing the impact that some of the current crises is having on, people around me.
And taking into consideration this unprecedented time that we're in, we know you're also a student on top of all of this, a student in Ontario. So you just went through the transition of online learning to in-person learning. What has been your experience throughout this pandemic as a student, Wyatt?
It's been relatively the same for, as it would be for my peers and for basically any other student who attends public school in Ontario, it's been, not super ideal having to, make the transition from online learning back to in-person learning numerous times. But just obviously recognizing that, again, these are unprecedented time, unprecedented situations. And so adapting to the situation. But I've really, tried to make the best of it during, the last period that we were doing online learning. I wrote an article, an opinion article for the Toronto Star expressing some of the concerns that I and some of my peers had. And, that really caught some attention of some people because they liked hearing from, the age demographic that's actually being affected by it, as opposed to sometimes letting adults speak for, the age demographic that's being affected by it. So, I mean, again, it's been an unprecedented time for everyone, but, just making the best out of it is basically the best that you can do in these times.
All right, Wyatt. Well, you did quite a lot throughout this pandemic itself. What would you say to young kids watching you right now in terms of following their dreams and voicing their thoughts and concerns, no matter what age they are?
Journalism allows you to, express the views of elected officials. I mean, politics is, kind of expressing your own views, as opposed to, being a journalist, you get to kind of go through, hear all sides of the story, and, hear the sides of various politicians and what they want. And, being a journalist is fun. And obviously there's sometimes where, it might not be as fun if you maybe you can't get an interview, but even sometimes, not everyone is going to appreciate the work that you do. But I mean, for me, at least, most people haven't. So it's been, a fairly welcoming experience.
Russia's top diplomat has told President Vladimir Putin that possibilities for talks with the West over Ukraine are far from being exhausted. Sergei Lavrov is proposing to continue negotiations over Moscow's security demands. This despite U.S. warnings of an imminent Russian invasion of Ukraine. Mr. Putin noted the West could try to draw Russia into endless talks without conclusive results, and he questioned whether there is still a chance to reach agreement on Moscow's key demands. Mr. Lavrov replied that there is always a chance and that his ministry won't let the U.S. and its allies stonewall Russia's main requests. All right, turning to Brussels now, where plans have fizzled for a major anti-COVID restriction protest planned near the European Union headquarters in the city. Police diverted traffic during the morning rush hour into the Belgian capital, narrowing some highways and imposing go-slow measures. A few hundred people on foot ended up protesting virus restrictions in a square in Brussels. A threatened blockade of Paris over the weekend also failed to materialize, despite days of online organizing efforts. In the Middle East, Turkey's president has arrived in the United Arab Emirates on a trip that shows relations between the nations are further thawing. For the two nations, the visit caps a months-long rapprochement born out of the coronavirus pandemic and geopolitical necessity. Turkey's economy continues to reel, but has received support from the Emirates. The UAE, meanwhile, has retooled its foreign policy to settle differences amid wider regional tensions with Iran. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia tries to overhaul its energy-dependent economy. The kingdom has announced plans to transfer 4% of the stock in the state-run oil giant Aramco to a sovereign wealth fund. The infusion is valued at nearly $80 billion. Sunday's announcement on state media comes as the oil firm is valued at just under $2 trillion. In the UK, a public inquiry is examining the wrongful convictions of hundreds of British postal workers who were accused of theft, fraud, or false accounting because of a faulty computer system. Between 2000 and 2014, more than 700 postal workers were wrongfully accused, with some convicted and sent to prison. The mistakes represented one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in British legal history. The failures were blamed on a defective computer accounting system called Horizon, installed in 1999. The post office claimed for years that data from Horizon was reliable. In April, the Court of Appeal overturned the wrongful convictions of 39 people. There looks like to be trouble in the east. Myanmar says it will not participate in this week's meetings in Cambodia of foreign ministers from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. The country spurned an invitation to send a non-political representative instead of its chief diplomat. The decision to restrict Myanmar's participation reflected a disagreement over Myanmar's lack of cooperation in implementing measures agreed upon by the 10-member group. It was to ease the country's violent political crisis following the army's seizure of power. Cambodia is the current chair of ASEAN. Passengers on board an American Airlines flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. had to subdue a fellow traveler who tried to open a door on the plane. The flight was diverted and the FBI took the person into custody. In response to a surge in unruly airline passengers over the past year or so, Delta Airlines had to reach out to the U.S. Department of Justice. This to put any person convicted of a disruption on board a flight onto the national no-fly list. Pakistan is allowing nuclear rival India to deliver tons of wheat to ease food shortages in Afghanistan. Trucks sent by Afghanistan under the deal with New Delhi will be allowed to collect wheat from India. This via Pakistan's Wagah border beginning on February 21st. The development comes more than 3 months after India announced that it would deliver 50,000 metric tons of wheat and life-saving medicines to Afghanistan. Los Angeles Rams fans are soaking up their team's Super Bowl victory. The Rams defeated the Cincinnati Bengals 23-20. It's the Rams' first NFL title since the 1999 season and their first representing Los Angeles since 1951. A 12-year-old boy in Victoria is making sure seniors at long-term care homes feel some love on Valentine's Day. With the help of his classmates at St. Michael's University School, Liam Pope-Lau has made and delivered thousands of Valentine cards for seniors over the last 5 years. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily.